Okay, the point of this video is to show you my notation for how to trace code in BlueJ. This also works if you're just tracing regular Java code, but I'm really focusing on what happens when you make a new object on the object bench in BlueJ, or maybe you make a new object in the code pad in BlueJ, or really you could be doing it in Java code. Okay, here's the background. We're going to be talking about a point class, and a point is really a class that just has an x and a y location to represent a xy coordinate on a coordinate frame. And so you could make a new point by right-clicking on point and saying new point. It defaults to point 1 as the name of the instance. You say OK. Magically, your point object pops up down here. And if you double-click on that point object to inspect it, you can see that we've got two fields, an x location and a y location. They're both doubles. If you want to look at how you do it in code, it would be this line of code down here. This is actually part of the code for the point class that I wrote. The only interesting thing to note here really is that whenever I make a new point, I always initialize it to the location 3.0, 6.2, just because I want to do something interesting in this example. Normally, probably you'd initialize it to 0, 0. So, the first thing that you should do is get a big piece of paper, and on that piece of paper you're going to draw off kind of two sections. One of them is going to be called bench variables, and the other is going to be called objects. If you're doing this not just using code, you might call it just variables or local variables. This variable one, you're always going to have an area for objects. So the question is, what gets drawn on that piece of paper when I right-click on the point? Oops, sorry. I right-click on the point class. I say new point. I'm going to let it say point 1 and say OK, or alternatively, I type this code. Okay, and here's what you need to do each time. First, make a box for the variable. So this is a declaration of the variable. It says point 1 is of type point. We could have done this in a separate line of code, but I couldn't fit that on the slide, so I just did it all as one big long line. So there's our box. Point 1 is of type point. Initially, the default value for an object is null, so we're just going to leave it like that for an object variable. Okay, next we want to make a box in this objects area for our new point. So there it is. I just made a box with a crown on it, labeled it point. The next thing we need to do is make boxes for all the fields that are in a point object. And so this is the top of the point class. It says there's two fields, x location and y location. So there you go. There's both of the fields, and we initialize them to 0 because the default for a double, and I just wrote DBL here because I can't fit double on the screen, is 0. So we initialized both of these to 0. Next step, we want to run the constructor. So here's the constructor function, the constructor method that I wrote, and that's the code that it has. The first line of the code says x location gets 3.0. We are currently running the constructor on this point. So we look inside of this point and say, do I have any boxes called x location? And the answer is I do, so I'm going to set it to 3.0. Next line, we got to run y location gets 6.2. Do I have anything called y location in here? You bet, so I'm going to set it to 6.2. And then the last step is to point this variable box at this object. So we're going to add the arrow, we cross out the null, and note that this arrow is pointing at the outside of the object, right? It would be kind of weird if I pointed it at 3.0 or if I pointed at the 6.2. Point 1 refers to this entire object here. So that's it. Congratulations, you've done it.